Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. One of the rising prospects in the heavyweight division, Daniel Dubois, the hard-hitting puncher from the UK, will be back in action next month, April 27th, at the SSE Arena at Wembley. So Dubois will be facing Richard Lartey, and you can see from the poster here, it's got Dubois front and centre for the show. He's headlining it. You've also got a number of other fighters on there, some decent names. Maybe the opponents won't be so good, but I found it interesting that Lahti is not in this poster. So it's got Dubois versus Richard Lartey. So that's very small, Dubois in very big letters, and Richard Lartey tiny. So this is the from Daniel Dubois' Twitter. It's me again, looking forward to putting on another great show for you all. Thank you everyone for the support. It will be another great night. So this is the promo poster versus Richard Lartey. When I first saw the promo poster, I actually thought, okay, they've announced another show, there's no opponent yet, and they'll try to find someone halfway decent for Dubois to get some rounds in against. And then I realized, oh, no, actually, he's facing Richard Lartey. And who is Richard Lartey, you might be asking? Well, he's an enigma in the heavyweight division. The guy really is a bit of a ghost. He's been largely campaigning in Africa for almost the entirety of his career. We'll go to his box rec now. So he is 14-1. 6'5". He's from Ghana, and that one loss was back in 2014 against a guy called Ergen Merson. So he retired in that fight in the 5th round, and Ergen Merson, when I checked out his page, he never fought again after that fight. So it's all a little bit strange, but since then he's been facing some real low-level opposition for the most part. And a couple of fights ago, he fought a guy called Boniface Kabore. So this guy here, so Richard Lartey weighed in at 245 pounds for that. Boniface Kabore was 192 pounds, so he wasn't even technically a heavyweight. And when you go check out Boniface Kabore's box rec, you find out that actually he was down at middleweight. Yes, middleweight, just back in 2017. So 3 fights ago, he was fighting at middleweight. And that was an occasion where Richard Lartey was due to have that fight, and Boniface Kabore was a very last-minute opponent. So it's hard to know how good Richard Lartey is because, as I said, he's a bit of an enigma. Much like Christopher Lovejoy, who was similarly ranked by the WBA, Richard Lartey is ranked by the WBO. So he has the WBO Africa belt, so he picked that up against that former middleweight. So he is number 14 in the rankings. Very little footage, very little is known about Richard Lartey in general. So it's really hard to say how good he is, except the only time that he fought outside of Ghana, he lost. And since then, he's actually been scheduled to have some higher level fights outside of Ghana, but he turned his back on them. So for example, back in the middle of 2018, he was signed to face Junior Fa in New Zealand, but he pulled out of that fight a couple of weeks before the fight. So that was in June the 22nd, that fight was going to be. A couple of weeks before that, he pulls out. And then he sort of surfaces within a week or 10 days, and he's confirmed to face Joe Joyce. So he ditches Fa to go face Joe Joyce, and then he pulls out of the Joyce fight. So, and that was literally with 1 or 2 days to go. And Joe Joyce ended up having to face, who was it? Avika Bakurin, I think, stepped in on about a day's notice or so. And he basically folded when, you know, he took a sort of cuffing shot to his hairline. So that was an instance in 2018 where Lartey was scheduled to face a couple of guys on the rise, Joe Joyce, Junior Fa, and he pulled out of those fights at relative short notice and no real explanation given. And I spoke to Junior Fa about what happened with Lartey at the time, and he sort of said, look, we just don't really know. He was meant to be fighting, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. And then he popped up to be facing Joe Joyce, and he pulled out of that one too. So when I did see that Richard Lartey was the opponent here, I was thinking, what are the odds that he'll actually go through with this and we actually see this guy turn up on the night and fight Daniel Dubois? Because I wouldn't be surprised in the least, given some of the track record here, if Richard Lartey actually pulls out. And I did wonder about the, going back to the promo poster, they could have actually had Lartey, you know, on here, because while there's not a huge number of sort of photos floating around, there is some, but including from his Facebook page. So this is Richard Lartey. This is, a recent-ish photo from about 6 months ago. But, interestingly though, because Richard Lartey actually has a number of names. So going back to his box rec, you've got, Richard Lartey, 14-1. But there's variations that have sort of turned up in the past year or two where he's described as Richard Nye Harrison, Richard Nye Lartey, Richard Nye Lartey Harrison, a whole bunch of names. And then you go to his Facebook page and it's Richard the Great. So it's, kind of confusing for fans to sort of track some of these guys. But I found him through his promoter's website some months ago. This is when he was going to be fighting Junior Fa. And it'd be hard for many others to sort of, if you didn't know who his promoters were, be hard to find him because it's not listed under Richard Lartey, it's listed under Richard the Great. So yeah, this is Richard Lartey. This is who he is. 14-1 record. But it's hard to say how good he is. And he's picked up this WBO Africa strap. And that's the reason that he's in the top 15. The WBO really loves to sort of reward guys that have these straps. And you just look through the list here. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 of the 15 have various regional straps. And then you have Victor Bisbal with the Latino International, who's got a double star denoted for whatever reason just outside the top 15. Does that mean he's number 16? It's hard to say. But they do reward guys that have these regional straps, and obviously having these minor titles, more sanctioning fees, and it's they want to have guys fighting for these titles. So yeah, Richard Lartey, it really is hard to know how good he is, but it's interesting because the press release here. So we'll just go through this in a few thoughts. Dubois heading to Wembley. Queensbury Promotion, okay, so it's announcing this. Daniel Dubois, 10-0, 9 KOs, will be facing off with his toughest opponent yet in WBO number 14 ranked Richard Lartey, 14-1, 11 KOs. See that line there, his toughest opponent to date. I mean, we just don't really have any idea if it really is his toughest opponent to date, because we have no real barometer or gauge of how good Richard Lartey is, because he hasn't, he's almost a ghost on social media. Even that Facebook page, for example, hasn't been updated in several months. But also the footage is just not there. He's been fighting in Ghana. Some of the sort of footage of his fights hasn't been turning up on YouTube or other places. So it's hard to really gauge how good he is, but he's got his hands on a regional strap into the rankings. But I would hazard a guess that Kevin Johnson, who Daniel Dubois could not stop, could not knock out, is probably a better, and more durable and more capable fighter than Richard Lartey, even at this point in Johnson's career, where he's, a complete shell of a shell of what he used to be. I think Richard Lartey is going to come into this fight, if in fact he turns up, because I'll actually believe he's fighting once the bell rings for round 1. I'm very skeptical that this is actually going to come to pass and it's actually going to happen. So it continues. The 21-year-old from Greenwich added a 4th belt to his collection at the Royal Albert Hall last week when he won the WBO European title. And actually, because he's won that, he's probably going to be ranked himself in the WBO in the next rankings update. So it continues to complement the WBC World Youth, Southern Area and English title honours already in his possession. It's expected a win over Lahti will see Dubois break into the WBO's top 10 heavyweight rankings. And it is possible, given he has a WBO minor title, beats another guy in the rankings with a minor title, that he could come into the top 10 in the next ranking update. Perhaps maybe not the next one, but the one after his fight in April, which generally that would come out sort of only a day or two after that fight. So we'll have to see what happens there. But I don't think Daniel Dubois is going to have too much problems taking care of Richard Lartey. The fact that the guy's a complete ghost, we really haven't seen much of him. He lost the first time he was away from home fighting outside of Ghana against a relatively unknown heavyweight. It doesn't bode well for Richard Lartey, and it screams of a padded record. And especially when you look at some of the guys that are the record here, it is very light in terms of quality of opponents. There's quite a few journeymen on here. And if he's fighting just, a couple of fights ago, a former middleweight who was only at middleweight a couple of years ago, doesn't say much about, the caliber of the opposition. And it does, to me at least, scream that this is going to be a mismatch. And if Lartey does in fact show up to the ring, he's getting knocked out, and probably knocked out early. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment. loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.